The final bosses of Monster Hunter games can be pretty weird. For the most part, the series has you fighting things that look quite grounded in reality. They've got elements of fantasy, some a lot more than others, but in general, there's a lot of thought put into their designs to make them feel more like animals that have evolved naturally, rather than purely fantastical monsters, which makes some of the final bosses stand out even more. Recently, we've had a bug that pilots a mech, an alien, a rock that turns into this freak, and the devil. They're an odd bunch, and they push the traits that give the series its identity to their limits. So what does Monster Hunter Wilds have to offer? Well, it's the strangest one of all. Zoshia is unlike any of the monsters that have come before it, and yet this is perhaps the first time we've faced a real monster, in the truest sense of the word. This is not a product of evolution, but a man-made biological weapon. Intended to be a guardian angel that would forever watch over its creators, Zoshia destroyed them instead. It feels like a complete departure from what the series offered before, and doesn't really fit in at all. And yet, it's an idea that's been around since before the first game was even released. Not only that, but so much of its design is a celebration of the series itself, complete with callbacks and references for players to discover for themselves. It's a great boss, so let's dive in and talk about what makes Zoshia truly special. First, let's talk about Zoshia's design and the ideas that drive it. At the start of the fight, it's completely white, covered in a smooth crystalline shell, with the crystals along its wings resembling feathers. The idea here is to have Zoshia be reminiscent of an angel, reflecting its original purpose in the story of being the ancient civilization's strongest protector, a literal guardian angel. The shell is also completely different from any of the other guardians, which basically just look like discolored regular monsters. It's smooth and refined, and I think that was to make it seem extra artificial, almost robotic. When that shell breaks and the true form comes out, we get a completely different story. Instead of shiny white, we see sheer black, and the smooth, constructed shell gives way to a roiling mass of flesh. Sharp horns jut out in random directions, introducing a grotesque chaos to the design. This version gives us the demon side of Zoshia, the protector that turned on its creators. All the random bulges and mutations contrast the smooth, artificial side its shell had, reminding us that even though it was created by humans, nature and life can't be controlled so easily. Even the way it moves reflects this idea. In the first stage, it's precise, careful. In the second phase, its movement becomes way more chaotic and animalistic, representing the shattering of control its creators felt they had over nature. Before we go any further, we should delve a little deeper into one of the strangest things Wilds introduced, because it's impossible to fully place Zoshia in context without talking about those creators. For better or worse, Wilds is far more story-driven than its predecessors, and a major chunk of the plot involves an ancient civilization that created artificial monsters. These constructs don't need to eat or drink, can't reproduce, and are effectively immortal as long as they keep getting enough fuel in the form of Wilk. And a big shout out to the team for giving us that abbreviation so I don't have to use the real name. They called these things the Guardians, since their sole purpose is to protect those ancient peoples from any harm the world might throw at them. And to be honest, I don't really like them. One of the things I love about Monster Hunter, and something I think gives it a lot of identity, is how grounded it is. A great example is how World prioritised building a natural environment, with a believable and logical ecosystem. There was a whole area based around the rot and refuse that would fall down a cavern, that in turn acted as fertiliser to allow vibrant life to grow above it. Another example comes from the Monster Hunter movie, where the design team pointed out that the movie's Diablos design had fingernails that were too pointy, and that because it burrowed underground, they would have evolved to be rounded instead. Thankfully, this was the only inauthentic thing in the movie. Fake monsters that were made by humans feel like a big step away from that kind of grounded design philosophy, but equally, they do open up some interesting possibilities. I made a video about the story of Monster Hunter World and the themes it was trying to explore, and a big part of that was about how humans fit into the ecosystem and natural world at large. The Guardians feel like an extension of that. In some ways, they're like the pinnacle of how humans can interact with nature, by becoming gods and creating some brand new form of life that stands separately from everything else. But another interesting point is that this grounded vision of Monster Hunter that I have wasn't always part of the original plan. From the Illustrations art book, we can read interviews from the team about how this early development played out, and it paints a very different picture of what the series could have looked like. While there was always the core idea of teaming up with others and fighting a big monster, the thematic style of the game was a lot more flexible. They say they knew it was going to be a fantasy game, and that their ideas tended towards magic. The world was originally going to be much more fantastical too. They even say I doubt any of us expected it to turn out so analog. which is a fantastic way to describe the overall feel of the final product. There's loads of cool ideas in these early artworks, and a few might even look familiar to you. That's because as the years have passed, the team has revisited some of these concepts and repurposed them, giving them the chance they never had. Newer players might look at this concept of a jaw wyvern with its mold breath attacks and see a resemblance with World's Val Hazak. There's also this two-headed monster that bears some similarities with Nakakos. But one of these early ideas has become more notorious within the Monster Hunter community than any of the others. That of the Equal Dragon weapon. The artbook says that the Equal Dragon weapon was discovered in the ruins of an ancient storage facility. It dates back to the Great Dragon War and was created by humans piecing together parts from various dragons. While artificial, it's as powerful as anything living, apparently making it the biggest threat to the dragons during the ancient war. The technology to make such a weapon has since been lost, and the war ended with both humans and dragons being brought to the brink of extinction. While not a one-to-one match with Zoh Shia, the concept and story lore attached to the Equal Dragon weapon should sound very familiar to everybody who played Wilds. Zoshia was the ancient civilization's ultimate weapon, and while we don't know all the details of how it was created, although we will get to that soon, we can be pretty sure it's based on elder dragons. So this fake monster that feels like it doesn't fit into the series is actually one of its oldest ideas, revisited, revised, and given a second chance. An added detail I want to point out here is that before this point, the Equal Dragon weapon was absolutely not canon. It's not been referenced in any game, and we as fans only came to know of it with the release of that art book in 2008. It's been a topic of discussion in the community for years now, but even then, it's still a niche topic. For those who'd heard about this, facing Zoshia for the first time and recognising what it was based on made that fight feel extra special, and I think that might have been a major goal of the development team. Monster Hunter World brought huge changes to the series, and in a lot of ways was specifically designed to reach an audience the series had never had before. For the 5th mainline game in the series, it served as an entry point to a lot of people. You were a brand new hunter, exploring a new and largely uncharted continent. You didn't need to know anything about the series before jumping in, and a lot of effort was put into helping new players understand how the game's systems and mechanics worked. It was amazing to see all these new players get into the series for the first time, and to have the community grow so much. At the same time, World was hugely different to any previous game in the series. Systems were streamlined and the hunters were given more tools to help them deal with monsters than ever before. A criticism you hear fairly often was that the game was made too easy, and this is often attributed, rightly or wrongly, to that goal of attracting and accommodating newcomers. With this in mind, you might wonder how the next game in the series will turn out. Will the focus be on catering to all these new players? And if so, how might that change the series' identity? But in Monster Hunter Wilds, it feels like extra care was taken to make those old school players feel included and seen. The hunter we play as this time isn't a newcomer, but an experienced veteran. The final boss being a repurposed concept that only superfans know about is something that's going to massively appeal directly to those that worry the series is forgetting about them. And it doesn't stop there. If you've played any of the other games in the series, you might have recognised some of Zoshia's attacks and felt a pang of nostalgia. The fireballs and breath attacks are straight from Iceborne's Fatalis, and most players probably recognise those with ease. But there's more. The bouncing fireballs it uses in the second phase are from Crimson Fatalis, and the lightning in the last stage is from White Fatalis, both of which haven't been seen since Gen Ultimate in 2017. Zoh's ground slam attack comes from Sunbreak's Geismagorn, and the claw swipes and bites are straight from Shara Ishvalda. The way it charges energy into the ground and then releases it in an explosion is similar to Xeno and Safi. At a bit of a push, I wonder if this move where it runs off and creates an arena-wide explosion is supposed to be reminiscent of Iceborne's Elatrion and its infamous Eschaton Judgment. These callbacks serve two purposes. The first being to build up the lore of Zoh Shia, letting us know that this abomination is a big mix of the strongest monsters in the series. The second is again to give those veteran players a bit of nostalgia and that rewarding feeling of recognising the history behind what you're seeing. When you hunt Zoh for the first time and its shell comes off, your Palico calls out that it's jet black, to which the hunter wonders incredulously at what that might mean. They've realised that Zoh must have some Fatalis DNA mixed into it, but it's not explicitly said. If Wilds is your first game and you've never heard of Fatalis, this line and its significance will go completely over your head, and the game never takes the time to explain it any further. This little line is the only acknowledgement the game makes on where these inspirations come from. For everything else, you're left to recognise and connect the dots yourself, something that again appeals to the superfans and makes noticing these similarities feel all the more special. I also love how this solves a problem that the final bosses of these games are going to increasingly face. As we see more and more super powerful monsters, the design team is going to have to answer a tough question. How can we top this next time? Zoh Shia answers this in a really interesting way, by mixing up all those powerful monsters that came before it into one. The result is something that feels familiar and yet brand new, perfectly balancing the zany new ideas of Wilds with the history and precedence of the series at large. And this balance between old and new is really why I think Zoh Shia works so well. It addresses the thematic threads the series has been grappling with, serving as the ultimate example of how humans can interfere with and try to control nature, with brand new, out there ideas, like artificial monsters and high-tech ancient civilizations. And to do this by revisiting one of the series' oldest and strangest ideas, and then infusing it with the DNA of fan-favourite monsters, is a stroke of genius. It's old and yet it's new, it's familiar and yet it's fresh. It's a contradiction, a monster that doesn't fit in, and yet serves as a celebration of everything that makes Monster Hunter what it is. Zoh Shia isn't just a great final boss, it's a perfect example of what makes this series special, and a reminder of why it's impossible not to get excited about where it's going next. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.